Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 274, and we're going to be talking a little bit about water sources. Before leading in, though, Ben and I were just talking here previously, before the episode, and we're going to try something a little new. And just for complete transparency, we've been doing a little research on our watch versus listens and algorithms, and as technologically declined as we are going to try a little experiment here. We're going to try making our episodes a slight bit shorter. And if anybody out there in cyberspace knows a little bit about this stuff, definitely drop us a message and see if we're on the right thing here. It's looking like YouTube and podcast algorithms may be working against us because people have a tendency to listen for so long and then come back and finish the rest. And it's looking like people are leaving. Anyway, if somebody knows about this stuff really good, please get in touch with me and see if you can help me on this, because I am literally just shooting from the hip on this. But anyway, long story short, new episodes, we're going to try for shorter, somewhere between 20-30 minutes, do a couple episodes, see how the algorithms reflect on this. If nothing changes, then we're going back to our old stuff and we're going to ramble like we always did. If things start to improve, that means obviously we need to change some things and we'll work towards that. And what about you folks out there? What are your thoughts on shorter episodes? Is that something you would like to see more of? And don't worry, you're not going to offend us. If you want them shorter, that's understandable. But if you don't care, or if no, you want to keep them the same length, let us know that too. I mean, in all honesty, because we do this, one, for the fun of it. So honestly, at the end of the day, if the algorithms don't matter. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, if you folks want longer episodes, 100% that's what we're going to do. But if you guys don't care, then we might as well try and work with the algorithms a little bit and see if we can boost our rankings and get some new listeners. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at, full transparency.
And like I said, it's hard to offend either of us, so we're not too worried about it.
Yeah, you're not going to offend us. If you're like, yeah, guys, your episodes are way too long, shorten them down. That's constructive criticism. We can take it.
Certainly can. And I've heard a few times people say that they think it would help us to be shorter, but oftentimes the same people are saying, "But I enjoy your length," so it's mixed results.
Exactly.
So if we're gonna go shorter, we have to get on track. So I'm gonna hold you to it.
100%. Let's get to it.
Water sources, right?
Yeah, so water sources for me is, when you're out in the woods, where do you look for water? What's your best water sources for drinking water, washing water, cooking water? Where should you avoid? If you're in a dry area, where can you find some water? Just briefly touch on this, hopefully help some of those new folks that are going out into the woods, maybe give them some food for thought, maybe people with a little experience, just refuel the fires up there.
Yeah, so a few quick things I want to talk about is finding water is step one of this process, and then we've talked about it in other episodes. Verifying that water is safe and usable is another process, and we're talking about sources of water. And I think for both me and you, I mean, we are in Canada. Canada has way more water than they should statistically. It hasn't really been a problem for me, but it's because I usually camp near rivers and lakes, and that's my goal. And it's the obvious answer, but usually I do get my water straight from the rivers and lakes I'm on. That being said, there have been times, especially on hikes, when I have, had limited access to those.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess that's more what I'm looking for here is, I guess at the end of the day, any water is better than no water, but there are some circumstances where you may want to avoid the water. You know what I mean? And some of them are going to be common sense. I mean, most people know not to, drink the stagnant water. If there's no fresh flowing water coming in and going out, it's probably water that you want to avoid. But the other thing people have to realize is try not to approach water that there's close beaver dams. Because one, you're looking at giardia and stuff like that could potentially be in the water, beaver fever and things like that. The other one is, if you are somewhat familiar with the water source where you're at, or river or something like that, if you are downstream from any kind of agriculture or industrial, that's another big red flag that a lot of people tend to overlook. If possible, try to avoid that water. There's a lot of stuff that, especially agriculture, farming and stuff like that, there's runoff. It goes into the water. You can get a lot of E. coli and things like that go in the water, and that could spread to you. And once again, as Ben said at the start, finding water and then purifying or making it safe to drink are two completely separate things. But if you can start with a better water, then you're less likely for it to go bad. You know what I mean? And I think that's all I really want to come on this.
So there's a few things to keep in mind with water. So growing up, I heard the old thing, oh, if it passes over 7 rocks, it's generally safe. That's not true. Just because it passed over a rock, the rock has no magical properties. It's not necessarily safe. So what Robert had said makes a lot of sense. And you have to be somewhat secure in knowing what happens in that body of water. The best example I was ever given is somebody was drinking water from a river one time, and then later on they were walking up the river, and about 150 to 300 feet, they found a dead moose laying in that river. So that rotting meat was contaminating that water quite consistently. Many animals are coming and going through that. You may have trails where bikes and trucks and things are driving over or through the river. That puts up silt and dirt in it, but it also means there could be leaking oil and fuels and other contaminants coming off of these machines. So being somewhat careful with your water choice, always find a way of purifying it or protecting it unless you're 100% sure of the water. If you're in an area that's relatively dry, and one time I was up in the Dover Hills, and it's not necessarily dry per se, but it's a lot of rocky area. If you're really struggling to find low-laying areas in that area, and if you dig, usually a few inches, you'll oftentimes find a ready source of water, because water gets trapped underneath the land there. And I've used this method to get water before, finding a spot to dig, and you can usually tell by looking for where the land is the greenest. So if you see grass is a good indication that there's enough moisture, especially if it's green, but other weeds and stuff, cattails, things like that, pretty good indication that that's a pretty damp area, and you'll be able to find water. Now, when you dig into that, it's most likely going to be muddy, and you probably want to filter it probably with your handkerchief or something first, but it might be the best source of water you're going to find. So even though in general that area might look pretty dry, if you see that kind of growth, stuff that's attracted to water, you'll learn that as you go. That's an easy way to get that. And there's an argument that water that's filtered through the ground might be cleaner than water that's stagnant and open to the air.
Okay, that's a topic for a different night. We will come back to that. I have two. I can go on either side of that coin for different reasons, but like I said, that's a topic for another night.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have done the cat hole for water before, and much like you said, I generally anywhere cattails, like you said, that's my big one because they're fairly tall. You can see them from a distance. They're easy to pick out. They're an identifiable plant. Generally, they only grow in wetter areas. If you can find some cattails, pull them out, dig a hole. Hopefully the water will fill up. As Ben said, filter it out with your handkerchief into a bottle or something, and then proceed to disinfect it in some way. And I mean, we've talked about how to disinfect in the past. You can boil or water filters or chlorine or pasteurize. There's a bunch of different methods. I highly encourage you folks to go back and check those out if you're interested in them. Not for tonight's episode, in the fairness of trying to keep this on topic. But yeah, the big thing in a lot of these cases is you do have to kind of get rid of that hard particulate. Don't drink muddy water. Is it going to really make you sick? Probably not. Is it going to be great on your stomach? Probably not. But once again, in a dire situation, I'm going to drink muddy water. You know what I mean? Some water's better than no water in a survival situation. So RM here, Florida is tough, not a lot of running water, and a lot of it is tainted with housing runoff or nasty parasites due to high temperatures. And that's the other thing with stagnant or slow-moving water. Especially here in the summer, you can get a lot of bacterial growth that comes from algae and stuff like that. I know the rivers locally will get like a blue algae or a red algae run in certain areas, and they'll literally tell you just to avoid the water, period. Like they don't want you touching it, in it, around it, because it can potentially make you very sick. So you do got to look into some of your local stuff like that and see if there's any of those like algae blooms. and kind of avoid those areas. Now, that being said, once again, sometimes you may have no choice in the matter. If it becomes a survival situation or something like that, then you have to make sure that you disinfect that water really well. And we have talked about boiling, and the debate there is how long do you let it boil? Go 5 minutes, you're going to be safe. Now, the other side of that is a lot of people say the second it starts boiling, it's good to go. Do your own research, different topic. But rule of thumb, 5 minute roll and boil, you're going to kill pretty much everything that's in it. And you're not going to kill the taste, and you're not going to kill carcinogens or foreign bodies. Like Ben was saying, if there's motor oil or antifreeze or something like that from an industrial runoff, it's not going to get rid of that stuff. It's going to kill the parasites and bacterium and things like that. Living organisms.
Yeah. And that's an important thing to note. And some things I look for. Say you dig your hole. This is, I think, the more extreme example of it. What I would do is empty that hole probably 2 and 3 times and let it refill. And that's going to get a lot of your stuff. And then leave it for a while so any dirt or anything will settle. Scoop anything that's floating off the top. If it has an oily look to it, you know that. It has that, like,
that shimmer, the manganese that floats on the top, or the scum, as a lot of people call it.
If you have something like that, I'd be very leery of that water. But if it looks clear and clean and there's no bad smells, then you have some indication that may not be too bad of water. I would still highly recommend boiling it. Water that's sitting in muddy, warm area, like you said, could be full of bacteria and parasites, and those can make your life absolutely miserable. And maybe not right away. It could be 6 months, 3 months before that tapeworm or that bacteria or that parasite really causes you an ill effect. Now, if that keeps you alive, then maybe that was worth it, and you'll deal with the problem later. But if you can avoid the problem altogether, I highly recommend it. Filtering and boiling your water, especially questionable, 100% every time.
Let's see, just a couple comments here before we move on. Let's see. Steve, the rule used to be if water is flowing, then it's okay to drink. This is a two-parter, but I'm going to touch both parts here.
Yeah.
So yeah, once upon a time, if it was fast-moving water, and I remember this from when I was a kid, if it's fast-moving water, you're safe to drink it. That's no longer the case around here anyway. Once again, you don't know what's upstream. Could be that dead moose, could be that farm runoff, could be some sort of factory, something like that, unknowingly or knowingly, bleeding things into that water source. So yeah, you can't really go with the free moving water anymore. Even if you're deep in the woods and you know there's nothing around, it's still not good anymore, because as we have said before, there's not many places left on this planet where there hasn't been signs of humans. And this is the thing, if it's a trickle, that's all good and dandy, but you don't know if somebody dug a bathroom hole somewhere just up from there. And now, once again, you're getting exposed to like E. coli and things like that. And this is what brought this topic into my mind, was that a cabin that I was at not long ago had a dug outhouse, but it was only about 50 feet away from their well, like just a dug well, and they were using it for drinking water, you know what I mean? And I'm like, 50 feet? That's awful close to an outhouse. Like, I don't know if I would attempt that unless I was in a dire situation. I'm more apt to walk the 200 meters away and take water out of the running river. And they said they've never had problems with it and things like that. I mean, they're rolling their dice. But, yeah, you can't necessarily go with free-flowing water anymore, unfortunately. The other part of this comment that he had was, now unless it's a spring and you're at the source, then you're probably boiling it. I don't remember the transition from the flowing rule. And here's the other thing with spring-fed water now. Once again, spring-fed water used to be a beautiful source of water. However, a lot of this crap is now seeping into the ground. You can't necessarily go with fresh spring water either. A lot of springs I knew as a kid that had beautiful drinking water have recently been tested, and they're coming up not safe to drink. Or boil first. Boil warnings, you know what I mean? Because stuff has seeped into the ground. It's getting and contaminating those underwater ground sources. Not to mention, like in the area I'm at, there's a lot of iron, manganese, magnesium, and a few other things that just really flow into this water, which, are they going to make you violently sick? Probably not. Could they give you the trots? Maybe. And is that what you want in the woods? You know what I mean? Especially if you're back a long way. There's nothing worse than having to come out with some sort of intestinal distress because you drank bad water. And once again, don't assume that you have to drink it to get sick. Thing like Giardia, it can get into other orifices if you're using it to wash. Like, it doesn't take much, and you can get beaver fever. We had fire crews out west, and we sleep in camps and stuff like that when we're out fighting fires in different provinces because, they're not going to put us up in hotels, too expensive. We're there to do a job. We understand it when we go out. But there was a bunch of folks that were literally just cooling themselves off in what seemed to be a perfectly good pond, all got Giardia. You know what I mean? None of them actually ingested the water, or so they claim at least. But yeah, they all ended up with Giardia, and that was just from literally washing their faces, cooling themselves down, seeping in. Maybe the residual that went in their mouth, whatever it was. You can't take anything for granted anymore.
There's actually a couple of good examples of springs, and I was watching an episode of, I think, Well and Septic on TikTok. If anyone's ever bored, look him up. He's funny. There was a local spring in his town. They went and tested it because he has the capability of it, and found that there were heightened levels of chemicals and bacteria in it. And he put a sign up in it. And he said he had people tear the sign down. They moved the sign to get water. He said you can only help people so much. Springs often were considered much safer, and I know people who still drink spring water in my hometown, but I am told that the drinking water on the tap has been tested to be significantly cleaner than that of the local spring that a lot of people go get their water from. People still swear by that.
Well, I can remember... sorry, go ahead. Every
time you drink from a source, you are taking a risk if you're not taking precautions. And if possible, get it tested. If it's a spot you go back regularly, you can take a sample back and send it in for testing.
Oh, 100%. And this is where I was going with my very short story now. Where I grew up down in Barney's River, my grandparents' house was always spring-fed. And I mean, it was an open spring right at the source, but it was close to a train track. You know what I mean? Train always going by. Recently, I've gone back down, still have the property, took some of the water, got it tested. And I remember drinking this water the entire time growing up. My grandparents ran their entire house from this well, or this spring. And now the test came back as not safe. You know what I mean? For different things. And a lot of it was, I'm trying to remember what it was. I think E. coli was the big one. And then there was chemical contaminants, which they assumed was runoff from the rail tracks. You know what I mean? Whatever they're carrying, some of it falls off. Coal used to be a big thing in our areas. Nova Scotia, our power plants are coal. For whatever reason, we haven't crawled out of the Stone Age yet. But a lot of that tends to fall off, seeps in. Now you're getting that chemical contaminants, and it's stuff that's going to hurt your stomach. It's going to cause you some distress.
If you take the road from Windsor all the way to Milford Station in Nova Scotia, every well, every spring in that area has high levels of gypsum. And I'm not saying gypsum itself is bad. It's in your toothpaste, it's in your drywall, it's everywhere. But there is something. It's not pure water you're getting. You're getting water mixed with something. And that mix could be harmless, it could be useful, or it may be harmful. It's something to be. So I think we can wrap this up because we said aim for 20 minutes. Low-lying areas, running streams, ponds, lakes. It's best to know what you have if you don't test it. Look for plants and greenery. If you're having trouble finding water, that'll usually help you identify a spot that you could dig and locate water. Springs are a good idea, but again, caution needs to be taken.
And I think that's the thing right there is with any water source, don't take for granted that it's quote-unquote fresh and safe to drink straight from the source. Never take that chance for the sake that it takes just to disinfect some water. Like, once again, we push the Sawyer Minis just because we're not sponsored by them in any way, shape, or form. We just happen to have them and they work fairly well. Run them through something like that, or at least boil it, or a couple drops of chlorine, something. Take the precaution, only takes a couple seconds, and then you're doubly covered. Once again, most of those things, they're not going to get rid of chemical contaminants and things like that, so be aware, even with purifying your water, you are still potentially rolling the dice on what you were ingesting into your body. Yes, you may be getting rid of the microorganisms and things like that, but there's a lot of synthetic materials and man-made crap that can go into the water that's just not going to filter out. And regardless of how much you boil it, especially if it's like, what's the word I'm looking here for, Ben? Plastics. Not plastic. Petroleum-based. Petroleum-based chemicals in there. You can heat that son of a gun as hot as you want. It ain't going nowhere. It's just going to be in there. And a lot of these things have cumulative effects, too. Like, yeah, a couple drinks may not bother you, but if this is your your favorite little watering hole and you're drinking a lot of it, this can accumulate into your blood and into your system. And then it could cause you prolonged effects. You know what I mean?
Good example of that is heavy metals.
Exactly. That's the one I was looking at, honestly.
Yeah. And we're finding that in some animals, like moose in Newfoundland have had heightened levels of cadmium, especially the livers. And now they tell people not to eat the livers from these animals because, well, it's getting it from somewhere. It's getting it from the environment. And somehow we have contaminated or allowed that contamination to increase. If you've ever been to an area that's been flooded, like a dam, natural levels of mercury end up increasing in those waters as they engulf trees and stuff because it's getting released. So things to think about and take into concern.
Nitrogen, just heavy levels of nitrogen from decaying material and things like that, or decomposing material. High levels of, you can actually get carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide that has been saturated into the water from things that have been decaying and stuff like that. Carbon dioxide more than carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide's a byproduct of combustion, so I apologize on that one. But yeah, you can get some weird things in water. It's worth cleaning it if you can. So just a couple real quick things from the comments before we roll this up, because I do like to hit everybody's comments here. Let's see. I guess it's more diligent testing that brought about the changes. I usually take water from home with me. I could purify it, but it's all still a risk. No risk if you're bringing it from home. And yeah, ultimately, if you can, bringing water from home is your safest bet. However, we realize that adds bulk. It's adding weight. Sometimes it's not feasible or, it's just not reasonable to carry water in. And in that case, Ben and I, we roll the dice. We use our Sawyer Minis, but we take calculated risks. You know what I mean? Yeah. I've even seen to the point where I have boiled water after running it through the Sawyer Mini. Neither of those are going to get rid of tannin. And that's another thing we've talked about in the filtration episode, so I encourage you to go back and look at that if you're wondering what tannin is. But basically, it makes the water kind of brown. And the last thing Steve here has is, what do you think of the Life Straw filters? The Life Straw filters are based on the same kind of technology as the Sawyer Mini, or the Sawyer Mini is based on the same technology as the Life Straws, whichever way you want to go with this. They are down to a certain size of orifice that goes through this, and it's like 0.01 microns or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but it's super small. Straw,
if you look it up, the Life Straw I don't think has as high filtration as the Sawyer Mini.
Yeah, I think the Sawyer Mini goes down a little smaller again, but once again, these things just work on super tiny tubes that are pulling the water through, and they should be small enough to keep a lot of bacterium and viruses and stuff like that out. And once again, do your research on it. The Life Straw and the Sawyer Mini, they're both very good options. I have used the Life Straw, had no problem with it. I did eventually go with the Sawyer Mini based on what Ben just said. It actually does have, once again, a smaller orifice going through it. Once again, I think it's the difference in like tens of thousands of microns or something like that. I don't have the information in front of me, and I don't want to waste the time looking it up because that's not the point of tonight. But yeah, definitely check it out. The Life Straw is good. I know I keep one in the cubbyhole of, not the cubbyhole, the toolbox of the ATV. And I'm going to use it if I need it out there. Just keep in mind, any of these filters, if you keep them, they got to be cleaned afterwards by backflowing fresh water through them, as well as you got to dry them really well, especially if you're getting into the colder climates, because they can freeze and burst. And if you burst some of those straws inside, you're not going to notice it right away, and you could be sucking contaminated water up and drinking it. That's the only kind of downside to those kind of filters.
I don't think the Life Straw is reversible either. I don't think they recommend backflush.
Flushing it? Okay. I know the Sawyer Mini, they do recommend backflushing it.
And with the Sawyer Mini, the Life Straw, I have their water bottle. It's great when we're canoeing. We just fill them up, put the top on, and drink straight from it. It's a little bit more convenient than a Mini. But yeah, I mean, they both have their place, and I think that's important to note.
Yep,
But
100%.
yeah, if we're going with the shortened time frame, I think we're ballpark there. So
25 to 30 minutes is where we're at. We're coming up on 25 minutes. So good time to wrap it up. Let's see if the new algorithms work. What do you folks think? Is this a better episode size? Or not enough, or still too much? We do this for you folks, plus our own enjoyment, of course, but our own enjoyment kind of goes hand in hand with your folks' opinions. So let us know what you think. So what's your final thoughts closing out here, Ben? And let's shut her down so we can stick to our game plan.
I think really, any water is better than no water. Taking precautions is absolutely important. Like I said, low-lying areas, running waters are slightly more likely to find good water, but take your time, take your care. Even collecting water, rainwater, has its risks, so even be safe with that. But yeah.
Yep. Like Ben, my final thoughts are any water is better than no water. Some places are better, some places are worse. Moving water is better than stagnant water, and stagnant water is the absolute bottom of the barrel. Like, you are definitely going to pick something up from stagnant water. Regardless of where you're getting your water, make sure you treat it. Filter it, pasteurize it, do something. Take the extra couple seconds. Your body will thank you later. Other than that, once again, folks, get out there, get dirty, have fun, play safe. Tell us about it. We'd love to hear your stories. So we'll see us next week. Hopefully with another interesting topic that's going to be a little shorter. We'll run a couple of these, as we said at the start. See how the algorithms flip out. I know Danny's on board for this and wants to talk about it. You guys are great. Thanks for live. Jacob DeFord's joining us there. Hey, Jacob, thanks for joining us. We're just kind of signing off now, though, man. But I encourage you to go back and listen to the start of it because we are trying something new here. All right, folks. You guys have a good night.